When Ethan started working for us, it seemed like a win-win situation. I met him through a college mentorship program, and he struck me as the kind of kid who just needed a chance, polite, hardworking, and eager to prove himself. At 20, he was balancing a part-time job and full-time classes while barely making ends meet. Offering him a gig around the house felt like a good way to help him out and lighten my own load. It wasn't a glamorous job, yard work, small repairs, organizing the garage, but he tackled everything with enthusiasm. Claire, my wife, was on board right away. She loved the idea of helping someone get ahead, and even joked that I was turning into a philanthropist. For the first few weeks, things were seamless. Ethan showed up on time, kept his head down, and got the work done. Sometimes, we'd chat while he worked. He had this unassuming charm, the kind that made people want to root for him. Claire seemed to like him too, often offering him snacks or chatting with him about his classes. It was nice at first, but over time, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. Claire started spending more time outside when Ethan was working in the yard or the garage. She'd bring him lemonade or sandwiches and hang around while he worked, talking to him about books or his plans after graduation. I didn't think much of it. Claire was friendly, and Ethan was respectful, always addressing her as ma'am, in that boyish way that made her laugh. Then there were the compliments. "You know, Ethan's really bright," she said one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner. I was talking to him about his literature class, and he has such interesting perspectives. He's really mature for his age. "That's good to hear," I said, tossing a dish towel over my shoulder. "It's nice to see him taking his studies seriously." She nodded, smiling softly. "He's such a hard worker, too. I mean, have you seen the garage? It's never been so organized." I agreed, though something about the way she said it lingered in the back of my mind. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more of these small moments. Claire seemed to light up whenever Ethan was around, her laughter coming easier, her tone warmer. I told myself it was nothing, just her nurturing nature. But the uneasy feeling I couldn't quite name started creeping in. One afternoon, I came home early from work. I'd left the office to avoid a 3-hour meeting that could have been an email and decided to surprise Claire. When I pulled into the driveway, Ethan's beat-up truck was parked at the curb, and I could hear the faint hum of the lawnmower from the backyard. I found Claire sitting on the patio, watching Ethan work. She had a glass of iced tea in her hand and a book in her lap, but her eyes weren't on the pages. "Hey," I said, stepping out onto the patio. She jumped slightly, her cheeks flushing. "Oh, you're home early," she said, setting the glass down. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just skipped out on a pointless meeting," I said, sitting down beside her. "How's it going here?" "Good," she said quickly. "Ethan's finishing up the lawn, and I've been catching up on some reading." I glanced at Ethan, who gave me a polite wave before turning back to the mower. There was nothing overtly strange about the scene, but something about the way Claire had reacted stuck with me. That evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I decided to ask. "You and Ethan seem to be getting along well," I said casually, pulling back the covers. Claire looked up from her phone, her expression neutral. "Yeah, I guess so. Why?" "No reason," I said, shrugging. "Just noticed you've been spending more time out there when he's around." She frowned slightly. "Well, someone has to keep him company. He's here all by himself most of the time." "He's working," I pointed out. "He doesn't need company." "Mark," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's not a big deal. I'm just being friendly." I didn't push it, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. The first rail crack appeared a week later. It was a Saturday, and I'd spent most of the morning in the garage with Ethan, going over some repairs for the mower. Claire was in the house, working on her laptop. Around lunchtime, she came out with sandwiches and lemonade, joking about how we looked like a couple of mechanics. Ethan laughed, a little too easily, and something about the way he looked at her made my stomach tighten. Later that day, I decided to check the garage after Ethan had left. I told myself it was to make sure he'd finished cleaning up, but deep down, I knew I was looking for something else. I didn't find anything out of place, but when I opened one of the storage drawers, I saw something that stopped me cold. A lipstick? Claire's. It wasn't unusual for her to misplace things, but what was her lipstick doing in the garage? I held it in my hand, staring at it like it might explain itself. That night, I didn't mention it. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking things. But the doubt was there, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The unease from finding Claire's lipstick in the garage didn't leave me. If anything, it grew stronger over the following days. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that it had ended up there by accident, or that I was reading too much into it. But every time I thought about it, I felt that same knot in my stomach tighten just a little more. Ethan continued to come by after his classes, and I kept an eye on things without making it obvious. It wasn't like I could accuse anyone of anything, not without evidence. And the last thing I wanted was to create tension in my own home over something that might not even be real. But the little things kept piling up. I noticed Claire dressing differently on the days Ethan was coming over. Not dramatically, nothing anyone else would notice, but enough that it stood out to me. She'd wear the kind of clothes she usually saved for date nights. Fitted tops, skirts that hit just above the knee, her hair done up in a way that felt deliberate. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual, hoping to catch Claire and Ethan in the middle of their usual chatter. When I pulled into the driveway, Ethan's truck was parked there, but the house was quiet. Too quiet. Claire? I called out as I stepped inside. In here, she replied, her voice coming from the kitchen. I found her at the counter, slicing vegetables for dinner. She looked up when I walked in, her smile warm but a little too quick. You're home early again, she said, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. Thought I'd surprise you, I said, my eyes scanning the room. Where's Ethan? Oh, he's in the garage, she said, turning back to the cutting board. He's working on organizing the tools. It was a mess in there. I nodded, though I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her words than she was letting on. Everything okay? She asked, glancing at me over her shoulder. Yeah, I said quickly. Just tired. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and headed out to the garage. When I stepped inside, Ethan was exactly where she said he'd be, crouched in front of the tool chest with a wrench in one hand and a rag in the other. Hey, Mark, he said, looking up with a smile. Hey, I replied, leaning against the wall. How's it going out here? Good, he said, wiping his hands on the rag. Just trying to make sense of all this. You've got tools in here that look like they haven't been touched in years. I forced a laugh, though my mind was elsewhere. The air in the garage felt charged, like there was something hanging there just out of reach. Find anything interesting? I asked, nodding toward the open drawers. Not really, he said, his tone casual. Just a lot of old stuff. Oh, and I found this weird jar of nails in the back. Looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I nodded again, watching him carefully. He didn't seem nervous or guilty, but there was something about his presence that put me on edge. I left the garage feeling more unsettled than ever. The turning point came a few days later. It was a Saturday, and Ethan had come by to help with some yard work. Claire had been flitting in and out of the house all morning, bringing him drinks and snacks, chatting with him like they were old friends. At one point, she disappeared into the garage, saying she needed to grab something from the storage room. When she didn't come back after 10 minutes, I started to wonder what was taking so long. I tried to ignore it, telling myself she was probably just reorganizing something or looking for something specific. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I walked to the garage, my footsteps quiet on the pavement. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The hum of the lawnmower was gone, and the usual sound of tools being shuffled around was absent. Claire? I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. I stepped further inside, my eyes scanning the room. The main area was empty, but the door to the storage room was slightly ajar. I took a step closer, and that's when I heard it, a muffled sound, soft but unmistakable. A moan. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then another sound reached my ears, Claire's voice, low and breathy, saying something I couldn't make out. I walked toward the storage room, my hands trembling as I pushed the door open. What I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. Claire was there, her hair disheveled and her blouse undone. She had Ethan pressed against the wall, her hands gripping his shirt as she leaned into him. You like that, don't you? She whispered, her voice dripping with a confidence I hadn't heard in years. "You're such a good boy for me." "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied, his voice barely audible. It wasn't just the physical act that shattered me. It was the look on her face. She was in control, completely at ease, her expression one of pure satisfaction. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a lapse in judgment. This was deliberate. They hadn't noticed me yet, too caught up in each other to realize I was standing there. I watched for a moment longer, a sick mix of anger and disbelief coursing through me. Then I spoke. "What the hell is going on here?" I stood frozen, the words hanging in the air like a gunshot. They both turned to look at me, their expressions as different as night and day. Ethan's face was pale, his mouth slightly open as if he were about to explain or beg for forgiveness. Claire, on the other hand, barely flinched. Her lips curled into a smirk, and she tilted her head slightly, as if amused by my reaction. "Well," she said, her voice calm, almost mocking, "this is awkward." "Awkward?" I echoed, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "That's what you call this?" Claire shrugged. Letting go of Ethan and smoothing her blouse like this was just another ordinary moment in her day. "I mean, you were bound to find out eventually. Honestly, I'm surprised it took you this long." Ethan tried to step back, but she grabbed his arm, holding him in place. "Don't you dare move," she said sharply, her tone snapping like a whip. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife, my Claire, was standing there, half-dressed, staring me down like she had nothing to lose. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Both of you." "Unbelievable?" Claire said with a laugh, the sound grating on my nerves. "You're the one who's never around, Mark. Always working, always stressed. Did you really think I'd just sit around and wait for you to notice me?" "I noticed you just fine," I snapped. "But this is how you solve things? By dragging some kid into our marriage and turning him into what?" she interrupted, stepping closer to Ethan, her hand sliding over his chest. "Go ahead, Mark. Say it. Into someone who actually listens to me? Someone who makes me feel alive." Ethan's face was a mix of fear and confusion, but he didn't move. "You think this is funny?" I asked, taking a step forward. Claire raised an eyebrow, her smirk widening. "I think it's ironic," she said. "You've been ignoring me for years and now, suddenly you care." The tension in the room was suffocating, and I could feel the rage building inside me, threatening to spill over. And then she did the one thing I didn't think she'd do. She kissed him. Right in front of me, she pulled Ethan closer and kissed him like I wasn't even there. He froze at first, his hands hovering awkwardly, but then he gave in, his arms wrapping around her. Something inside me snapped. "Enough," I roared, grabbing Ethan by the collar and yanking him away from her. He stumbled, nearly losing his balance, and I shoved him hard against the wall. "Mark, stop," Claire shouted, but I wasn't listening. My hands were shaking as I turned to her. "You think this is funny?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You think you can just do whatever the hell you want, and I'll just stand here and take it?" She didn't answer, but the defiance in her eyes was enough to make my blood boil. I turned back to Ethan, who was still slumped against the wall, and grabbed the first thing I could find, a bottle of oil sitting on the workbench. "You want to play games?" I said, unscrewing the cap. "Let's play." "Mark, don't," Claire yelled, but it was too late. I poured the oil over Ethan first, the liquid soaking into his shirt and dripping onto the floor. He sputtered, trying to shield himself, but I didn't stop. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice deadly calm. When Claire tried to intervene, I turned the bottle on her, the oil splashing across her blouse and hair. She shrieked, stepping back, but I didn't stop until they were both drenched. "You're insane," she screamed, wiping her face. "Maybe I am," I said, throwing the empty bottle onto the floor. "But at least I'm not a liar." I grabbed Ethan by the arm and shoved him toward the door. "Get out," I said, my voice low and cold. "And don't ever come back." He didn't argue. He stumbled toward the exit, his shoes squeaking on the oil-slicked floor. "And you," I said, turning to Claire. "You're not welcome here anymore. Pack your things and go." She stared at me, her expression a mix of fury and disbelief. "You can't just throw me out," she said. "Watch me," I replied, opening the door and pointing outside. For a moment, I thought she might fight back, but then she grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the empty garage, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. My hands were still shaking, my breath coming in shallow gasps, but for the first time, I felt like I'd taken control. They were gone, and the house was mine again. The garage was quiet again, the silence only broken by the faint dripping of oil onto the floor. My head was spinning, my chest heaving as I tried to process everything that had just happened. Claire was gone, Ethan was gone, and I was standing alone in the mess they'd left behind. Not just the physical mess, but the wreckage of everything I thought I knew. And then it hit me. The camera. I had installed a security camera in the garage months ago. It wasn't for any grand reason, just to keep an eye on things in case of break-ins, or to see if the kids next door were messing around with the tools again. I hadn't thought about it in ages, but now the memory came rushing back. I grabbed a rag to clean the oil off my hands, my movements mechanical as my mind raced ahead. If the camera was working, and I was pretty sure it was, it would have caught everything. Every word, every action, every smug look on Claire's face. I walked over to the shelf where the small DVR unit was hidden behind some old paint cans. The little green light was on, blinking steadily. I pulled the device free, my hands still trembling, and carried it inside to my laptop. The footage wasn't hard to find. I fast-forwarded through the earlier parts of the day until I saw Claire walking into the garage. My heart sank as I watched the scene play out, reliving every humiliating detail from a new angle. The way she cornered Ethan, her tone, her confidence, it all made me sick. But there it was. Proof. I stopped the playback when the footage reached the point where I poured oil on them. I couldn't have that part getting out. I didn't need anyone questioning my sanity or twisting the narrative to make me the villain. I clipped the video, cutting it just before that moment, and saved the rest. The final image on the screen was Claire, leaning into Ethan, her voice dripping with the same smugness that had haunted me since the moment I caught them. I stared at the file on my laptop, my finger hovering over the delete button. For a moment, I thought about letting it go, about trying to move on without escalating things further. But then I remembered the look on Claire's face when she mocked me, the way she kissed him right in front of me like I didn't even matter. No, they weren't getting off that easy. I spent the next few hours editing the footage, making sure it was clean and concise. No unnecessary details, no context that could lead back to me. Just enough to make it clear what they had done and who they were. The title was simple but damning, Caught in the Act, The Plumber and the Married Woman. It was late by the time I uploaded the video, but I didn't care. I hit publish and closed the laptop, leaning back in my chair as the weight of my decision sank in. At first, nothing happened. The video sat there with no views, no comments, just another drop in the endless ocean of the internet. I went to bed, my mind too tired to think about what might come next. By morning, everything had changed. I woke up to a flurry of notifications on my phone. The video had gone viral overnight, spreading like wildfire across social media. The comments ranged from outrage to schadenfreude, with people condemning Claire and Ethan while others reveled in the drama. "I can't believe people like this exist," one comment read. "Imagine being this shameless," said another. It hasn't long before people started identifying them. Someone recognized Ethan from a photo on his college's website, and within hours, his name and face were all over the internet. Claire wasn't far behind. Someone found her photography business page and shared it with a simple caption, "Cheater alert." I watched it all unfold from the safety of my living room, the satisfaction building with every new comment and share. For once, they were the ones on the defensive. They were the ones dealing with the fallout, not me. By the end of the day, Ethan's social media accounts had been deleted, and Claire's business page was flooded with one-star reviews and scathing comments. People even started sharing screenshots of the video to local community groups, ensuring that their humiliation reached as many people as possible. Jake called me that evening, his voice a mix of concern and admiration. "Mark, tell me you're not behind this," he said. though I could tell he already knew the answer. I smirked, taking a sip of my beer. Let's just say karma has a way of working itself out. Jake let out a low whistle. Man, I don't know whether to call you crazy or a genius. But I'll say this, you've got guts. It's not about guts, I said. It's about justice. Over the next few days, the fallout continued. Ethan lost his part-time job after the video reached his boss, and his professors started questioning his conduct. As for Claire, she tried to do damage control, posting a vague apology on her business page about personal struggles and mistakes. But it only made things worse. By the end of the week, she shut down her page entirely. Part of me felt guilty watching their lives unravel, but then I remembered the humiliation I'd felt in that garage, the way they had mocked me like I was nothing. They deserved this. Every bit of it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The days that followed were strangely quiet. The video had done its damage, and the storm it created seemed to settle into a kind of eerie calm. Ethan and Claire had disappeared from public view, their social media accounts wiped clean and their lives, at least as far as I could tell, in tatters. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The house, once filled with tension and unspoken words, was now mine again. It felt strange at first, walking into an empty kitchen, sleeping alone in the bed we used to share, but the silence was comforting. It was a reminder that the chaos was finally over. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch with a beer in hand, Jake stopped by. He leaned against the railing, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "what's next?" I shrugged, staring out at the darkening sky. "I don't know. Just move on, I guess." "Move on," Jake repeated, nodding slowly. "And how's that working out for you?" I took a sip of my beer, the bitterness a welcome distraction. "It's complicated." Jake let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You're a hell of a guy, Mark. Most people would have folded under what you went through. But you stood your ground. You fought back." "Yeah," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "But at what cost?" Jake raised an eyebrow, his tone turning serious. "Regrets?" I thought about it for a moment. Did I regret what I'd done? The video, the public humiliation, the way I'd poured oil on them and thrown them out of my house. It all felt like a blur now, a series of decisions made in the heat of the moment. "No," I said finally. "Not regret. Just emptiness. Like I won. But the prize doesn't mean anything." Jake nodded, his expression softening. "That's normal. You went through hell, man. It's gonna take time to figure out what comes next." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. What if there is no next? What if this is it? "There's always a next," Jake said firmly. "You just have to be ready to see it when it comes." That next came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday morning, a few weeks after the video had gone viral. I was out running errands when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Emily, an old friend from college. "Mark," she said, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Emily," I said, surprised but genuinely happy to see her. She looked just as I remembered, bright eyes, a warm smile, and an energy that seemed to light up the room. We stood there in the middle of the grocery store, catching up like no time had passed. Emily had been through her own struggles. Her husband had passed away a few years ago, leaving her to raise their 2 kids on her own. Despite everything, she carried herself with a quiet strength that I couldn't help but admire. We exchanged numbers, promising to grab coffee sometime, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Our first coffee date turned into a second, then a third. Emily was easy to talk to, funny, kind, and honest in a way that felt refreshing after everything I'd been through. She didn't push for details about Claire or the divorce, but when I did open up, she listened without judgment. Her kids, too, were a welcome addition to my life. They brought a kind of light and laughter to the house that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to me and smiled. "You're different now," she said. "Different how?" I asked, curious. "Lighter," she said simply. "Like you're finally letting go of all that weight you've been carrying." I thought about her words, letting them sink in. She was right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward, leaving the past where it belonged. Meanwhile, Claire's life had taken a very different turn. Rumors had started to circulate about her and Ethan, fueled by the fallout from the video. Her photography business had collapsed, and she'd left town not long after. Ethan had dropped out of school, his reputation too tarnished to continue. I didn't hear from either of them, and I didn't go looking. They were part of a chapter one was determined to leave behind. One day, as Emily and I were cleaning out the garage, she found the old camera tucked away on a shelf. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up. "Nothing important," I said quickly, taking it from her and setting it aside. But as I watched her laugh and roll her eyes at my secrecy, I realized something. The camera didn't matter anymore. The video, the betrayal, the anger, it was all in the past. And for the first time, I was ready to let it stay there.